All right, friends, welcome to the Work Item Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Work Item Podcast. And we have a fantastic guest today, Adrienne Tacke. Welcome to the Work Item. So great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Den. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't we start with maybe the fundamental question of this podcast? Tell us more about what you're doing these days.
That can be a whole range of things, even today, but my formal job title is a senior developer advocate at Cisco. And aside from work, I'm actually, because I like to fill my free time with things, also writing a book on code reviews, and I'm also creating another LinkedIn learning course on Azure Durable Functions. So, no free time as of right now.
So quite a bit. Wow. So engineer, author, developer advocate, mentor. How are you finding time for all of this? What's the secret?
I don't know. I'm asking myself that every day. But, so far, what seems to work for me is at least trying to batch similar, categories of things on the same days. That way I don't have to context switch so much. But, other than that, it's just whatever I can get done in the moment, for the focused amount of time. That seems to go really well and helps me keep going rather than kind of getting down about myself to say, "Oh, you didn't get to that part or this part."
Basically batching and incremental progress, which, by the way, very underrated because a lot of folks think that you have to do everything at once and it's either a massive success or it's not. And you're just kind of, sequencing it out.
Absolutely. I think I've kind of moved into this way of working. Before I was like that, where I'm like, okay, I have to write this entire blog post or I have to do this entire script. And if I don't have this finished today, I'm a failure. I'm going to completely ruin the rest of my work schedule. And that's not the case. I would add more stress for myself doing it that way. And so I've found the way I would naturally work and how I felt more in balance was to say, okay, instead of having the whole script or the whole blog post, have this section done for today. And if you get that done for today, then you can count it as, today is not a total loss. Even if that's the only thing you did today, you still made a little bit of progress.
I have so many questions about that, and we will get to them. But I want to zoom out a little bit and start with kind of the very early days. What inspired you to go into a career of software engineering advocacy? Like, what was the first kind of nudge in that direction?
So I love telling this part about my journey because I did not have any, I would say, influence when I was younger to go into this field. I didn't have really any kind of engineering influence from some figure or anything. I actually wanted to be a pastry chef when I was much younger. And so as college rolled around and I needed to find a job to help pay for college, one of the highest paying ones was for a student technician job. And so that's the one that I took. It wasn't because I wanted to answer phones and helped you, reset your password. It wasn't, nothing about it did I know or want. And so over time, I think it was more because the opportunity was there. And as I started to do the work, I found that I actually liked it accidentally. That's how I started to pursue other opportunities. So it started at a student technician job, which led into a software development internship job. And then that job led into other things like, oh, you problem solve this way. Oh, you write code this way. Oh, you do all of these different things. And then as my career progressed, I accidentally set a career goal for myself to give a conference talk, which is how I accidentally fell into developer advocacy. We can talk more about that later because that goes all the way in another direction.
I like the framing here because I think that's a misconception that a lot of folks that are listening to the show, and especially early in career, mid career, oftentimes they encounter this concept that folks might have heard about the imposter syndrome, right? And that a lot of it comes from seeing folks that are, yes, I was predestined to be an engineer because from age 5, I used the first computer, right? And not everyone follows that path. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not set up for success in the future. And you're kind of showcasing it by your own example that it's not necessarily there was a dream from when I was 2 years old, but it's more of like this was something that was kind of means to an end, and then it grew into something else.
Absolutely. And for the people who knew that, innate in their early childhood, I say that's really awesome too, because at least you kind of had that to guide you and say, this is what I want to do. Or, you maybe have a little bit of a head start because you know this is what you want. I think for a lot of people, they just don't know. You get to college or you get to university and you're expected to like, know with that amount of certainty, this is what I have to do, this is what I have to graduate in, this is what my rest of my life potentially is going to be doing, and sometimes you just don't know. So being able to test it out or having the opportunity to try it out and say, hey, this is actually what it means, versus what might be shown to you on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever, that it's not always glamorous. If you're able to try the work out beforehand and make a decision that way when you are unsure, I think it's much better rather than just, hoping it works and saying this should be what my life should be about.
And something also you alluded to, and that is that oftentimes we get this glamorous, pretty picture of everything is going smoothly, and look how like step by step everything just worked out perfectly. And it's rarely like that.
Rarely, rarely. One aside to that, and I don't know, this might be a hot take, but um, whenever I see these day in the life of software engineers, I feel like part of those have kind of ruined it for the rest of us who do remote work, because it's like, here I am waking up at like 10:30 a.m. I go grab a coffee, I go check some emails, I have some time to make like a full lunch, take a shower. It really builds this perception that we're not doing anything. And then of course this is what's perpetuated, is like, you don't want remote workers, look at what they're doing, this is what they're doing. And these are the kinds of glamorized versions of what people think remote workers do, any remote workers, but particularly in tech. And so yes, there's always two sides to everything. Those are especially curated, edited, made to look a certain way. And so I hope more people understand that. It's the same with when I do my speaking at conferences, yes, it can be glamorous to go travel and go to places, but there's another side to that. You are stuck in economy class, you're living out of a suitcase, you miss home, you are kind of in a place where sometimes it's not always the most friendly to you. And I hope I try to show the balance between the two, that there are good parts, but there are also bad parts, or parts that are less talked about.
That resonates a lot because I used to work in a DevRel organization, and this is precisely the case when people from outside look and say, "Wow, we must be so lucky to travel the world and all these conferences." And it's like, yeah, 12-hour flight and economy, and then get to the hotel. You have like 4 hours between like you shower, and then you have to run to the conference center for the rehearsal and then do it, and then wake up at 6 in the morning that day with jet lag and all, and go present. It's like that is as far from glamorous as you can possibly imagine.
Pretty much, and then you gotta make sure you get on the Wi-Fi. Sometimes Wi-Fi is weak, sometimes your demo is not working. Oh, how do you get to the actual location? Do you take train? Do you take, Uber? Oh, they don't have Uber here, you have to use something else. You have to use that country's particular, app for Uber, and there's all these things, and so, yes, it's not always so smooth, and this is all assuming, right, that you're ready, your slides are ready, you're not reworking it, you're not still working on your demo. There's a lot of parts that go into it, but in the end, it is worth it when it does all come together and you finally have given your talk and get to talk to the people there and get to have those meaningful conversations. So there's good and bad.
It's also interesting that watching those videos that you were describing, like the day in the life, sometimes like, wait, this is what a day should be like? Because
Right?
like this is not right.
I'm
It's like
doing
it's
something wrong.
I know. It's like that meme, it's like, "You guys are getting paid?"
Yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, it is that. It's like, "Wow, you get lunches like that at 10 in the morning?" Because 'Cause I've been yeah. Um,
exactly.
what side of the aisle are you on nowadays if you were talking about remote versus office? Because right now, again, hotly debated topic. A lot of people say, like, you have to be in the office to do creative work, to collaborate. Where do you stand on that?
I think it really depends on the person. I think if I had to make an executive decision that would apply to the general public, I would say hybrid would where it's at. It would be at remote. like I've been remote for I think almost 4 or 5 years now, and I will argue it's been the most productive for me. I can do what I need to do within my schedule, whether whatever your other obligations are, you make it work. That's your responsibility to make it work within the timeline. You're given the flexibility to be responsible with that. On the other hand, what I miss about working in the office is there's much tighter bonds across teams. So, like the teams I've had have been fully remote. One team, I didn't meet any of my team members until like a year and a half in. And so it's really hard to build that camaraderie among the team. And, you can do game nights and stuff like that, but it just doesn't replace what you get in an office. So I think for me personally, and I think would work well for others, is to have a majority of the time be remote and then have some days in the office, or at least maybe once a quarter you come in and meet your team so that those bonds are facilitated and you feel closer to your team. You feel like you know your team rather than them just being random boxes on your screen.
This, kind of perpetuates the theme that you mentioned at the very beginning. It's all about balance. It's that the balanced approach, which it also, I see the both sides of the coin here because there is, Zoom fatigue is real. It's very much like at some point you're like, oh, another meeting and another like staring at and I've seen folks take like very extreme measures where they're like, you know what? I'm so tired of this being a virtual meeting. I'm gonna feel like I'm on the call. So I'm gonna drag a window over the Zoom screen and then I will not see the people. And that it will just pretend that this is an audio call because it feels better. So like we're getting to this kind of level of life hacks to circumvent this kind of like this feels so like artificial.
That is the first time I've heard that, but I might actually try that. The fact of dragging a window in front. I guess it depends again. For a lot of my meetings, we don't force people to have the video on, which is great. I think that contributes a lot to that Zoom fatigue where you're expected to be there and be there paying attention and all that stuff. But that is a good thing I haven't heard. I might try that the next time, even though sometimes I just have the video off.
What's also interesting in the world of remote is how we just kind of push the norms of the office into the remote world, right? Like to me, one of the biggest things that we're just kind of talking about this now is meetings, and that is, my goodness, wouldn't it be nice if we had less meetings?
Absolutely. I get annoyed when I have my schedule pretty aligned for the week where I'm like, okay, because I kind of mentally build out my week, right? Like I have my podcast with Den this Thursday, and I kind of try to batch, okay, if I'm already going to be at home with a meeting, what other meetings can I be here? And I'm just going to set Thursday as a meeting day. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm not going to set any like medical appointments or anything where I have to go rush out and in. I try to lessen the stress for myself. But then, what I dislike a lot is sometimes a random meeting will pop up and you're like, sometimes it kind of messes me up for my week because I'm like, I wasn't expecting this. So the more ahead of time that I know these are the things that are happening on these days, the better. But again, you gotta adapt. And so sometimes I'll just take the meeting on my phone wherever I am. Sometimes I'll be at the library because I've allocated that day to work on my book, and then like a random meeting pops up that I can't. First of all, if I can ignore it, I'll just ignore it. Like, do I have to be there? I don't have to be there. Great, it doesn't interrupt me. But if I have to be there, sorry, wasn't expecting this. At least I'm still here. I'll be audio only, and that's that. You just kind of have to adapt to it.
I love that. So it's prioritization, and saying no to things is very, very empowering, right? Because to me, it's like if you say yes to something, that automatically means no to a lot of things. And if you say no, it's just no to one thing.
Yes. You would think I'd have learned how to say no, and yet here I am with like multiple things and multiple deadlines. But yes, after this, I would say phase of my life where I do this often, like, just like I like to batch things, I batch all of these random activities and things that I'm working on aside from work. But after this phase, I think I will know much better now how to say no, like no, or maybe if I'm going to work on something one at a time, because this has probably been the most hectic I've felt compared to the last time when I had like a bunch of conferences lined up one after the other. I said I wouldn't do it again, and I think I just needed to live it and then go, oh, okay, I really mean it this time. No.
Now I just feel bad for randomizing you with some random podcast. So
No,
here
no,
we
no,
are. So thank you.
no.
I
You're
want to
good.
talk about something that I know you also do, and that you are a mentor. Tell me more about that part of your work. Like, what kind of made you say, you know what, I also want to help other folks to be successful?
So this, I would say, started more along probably 2017 when I was in my last full-time software developer role. And this is where I felt I was already late, but I decided to create an Instagram account. And I was like, okay, what am I going to be about? Is this personal? Is this professional? Started perusing around and I saw that there was like a software development IG world. And so I'm like, okay, let's do that. So it started there. It ended up growing, which was not my intent. I just started to share what I was learning at the time. It was a lot of focus on migrating a platform we had from an on premise platform to Azure. And so I was just sharing my learnings and then sharing, pictures of myself because number one, I didn't see many people that were like me that were in software development. Number two, I didn't see any that were Filipino, which is something I'm very proud of and want to show because a lot of Filipinos, it's like you have to go into the medical field. That's the only choice. It's kind of a funny joke, inside joke. And so I'm like, that was not for me. And hopefully, if I share that this was another, path to a job that someone might like and they really don't want to do the medical field, I would feel good about saying, hey, this is a potential path for you. And then just as that started to grow, I would get more questions about how do you start this? What do you do? How do you like it? And then I would get a lot more questions about, how do you deal with being in a either in a team or a company where they don't take you seriously because one of the things about my account was that I would dress pretty feminine. I would wear heels, I would wear skirts and dresses, and this was intentional to say not all software developers are casual and hoodies are men and all that stuff. So I would get a lot of those kinds of questions, and so think through sharing my story, it was another way to show other people who would find my account that, hey, you can do this too. And if there's any way I can help, let me know. That was one part of the mentorship. The other part was um, being part of Women Who Code, which is this really large organization that helps to get more diverse people into STEM. They have this like volunteer map that they have that's all over the world. And so I listed myself on there and I actually got a couple calls from local schools here in Las Vegas, which is where I'm based. And so that was really, really cool because I went to a couple elementary schools, high schools, and same thing, I shared my journey and it was a very important to me to like show up there full heels, hair done. And one of the best moments I remember was I went into an elementary school and I had to talk to some first graders. And I came in and these little kids were sitting on the floor ready to listen to me and talk about my job, and there's these little girls looking up at me and they're like, are you really a software engineer? I'm like, yeah, I am. They're like, wow. And so that was a very fulfilling moment for me to say, just existing, just being here, showing them that I am a software engineer and what I do is like that could change someone's whole world, whole perspective. And so that really made me want to focus and do a lot more of that. So when I can, when I have time, I do go to schools and talk to classes about software engineering in general or what my tech journey has been like.
That is wonderful, and you're absolutely right. I think representation matters, and folks seeing kind of themselves in your image in the future is very, very important. And I think it's amazing that you're doing this. Now, in terms of the process of kind of building out yourself as a mentor, what do you see as maybe some misconceptions that folks have about the industry, the job, the role? Like we talked about some of it already, but what else did you spot?
So I think with this kind of accessibility, so my account on Instagram was public. My LinkedIn, I'm pretty good about answering any questions because the messages are open. So this accessibility can be good and bad. There are genuine people who are like, I saw you from this random thing and I have a very specific question, or I am at this point in my career. I know you're super busy, but if you have some time, I'd love to have like a 15-minute coffee chat with you and ask you these questions. I'm always, when I can, willing to help these people. Then there are people who are just like, hey, um, what should I do to become a software engineer? Just like, I'm going to hand it to you. Here's what it is. There's really no intent behind their question. They're kind of just like asking, provide me the information right away. And that's it. There's no hello. There's no rapport or like build up to it. It's kind of just like, I want something from you, give it to me. And that's how it comes off sometimes. And this is similar to at conferences where you have your hallway track and you get to talk to people after your talk or during the conference, and it falls between those two mediums. There are people who are very engaged, have something very specific in mind, and have at least done a little bit of due diligence to say, I have a very specific thing to ask you, could you possibly help me out with this? Versus, one recent example, hey, you work at Cisco, can you get me certified? I'm like, first of all, I have nothing to do with that department. Second, I actually don't have any history with that. And third, sorry, no, do a little bit of research first. Like, it's kind of that, just that due diligence makes a really big difference, I think, for me. And I wish more people knew that it's not wrong to want to ask, potential mentors questions or ask them for help or anything like that. But especially if they don't advertise that they are allocating that time to be there, and you're kind of just hoping and asking, you know, randomly, just be conscious that they are busy people too. They have a lot of people possibly asking them questions too, and really try to see if they've already provided the answer in some other form, maybe a blog post, maybe a YouTube video that they've already provided of the most asked questions of them, or see if they actually provide like a Calendly or a calendar link where they are inviting you to ask for a coffee chat. Those are more signs of, I'm open or available right now to be able to help you and to actually give you the full attention to help you.
It's that bit of the bidirectional effort, right? Because there's that assumption, right? Like if you reach out to somebody, they expect you to maybe like pay them, or like it's not necessarily that, right? It's like coming in with a bit of empathy and genuineness and saying, look, I need your help with this particular topic. Because you're absolutely right. Like folks reaching out to random, like, help me become a software engineer. It's like, okay, where do we start? Like, right? Like, versus somebody coming in and saying, hey, I'm trying to break into the industry. I've tried doing this. Like, I don't understand what's wrong. There's a very specific, narrow area that you can actually help. And also not expecting that it's all about you now, because, like, yeah, I asked you the question. Please go above and beyond for me, because, like, you're one of many, many people, as you said.
Right. It's not to say, like, I'm such a special person that's well known that so many people are asking me. It's just I do have a sizable amount of people who ask some questions. So you want to be able to help those that need the help, but you also need to do a little due diligence. Like, is there something specific about me or my journey that you're asking this very generic question? I like to equate it to like when you open a help desk ticket or you ask a Stack Overflow question, you ask for help anywhere. There are those that are just like, okay, it's a single sentence. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? What is the context of the problem? What do you need help with? What is the outcome you're looking for? The more information and context you can provide, the better I can help you faster because I know what you need. But if you don't give me any of that, then it's very unlikely I'll be able to help you.
And also, folks underestimate just the amount of effort it takes to engage with a lot of folks, right? Like you can take, you brought up the example of the support tickets. Like if you have one or two support tickets, like okay, but sometimes like I've spent days, oftentimes researching one or two tickets. That's one or
Yep.
two, right? Because like there is some problem that we need to figure out. Like if you have 10, 20 requests, like we're not talking about like even massive celebrity style, like it's just 20 requests. That eats up a lot of time and effort.
Absolutely, especially if this isn't your full-time thing. Like I said, I still have a full-time job. I still have my other things that I'm working on, like currently right now, my book and my course. But even if those were not on my plate, again, even just the full-time job alone, I still want to relax after work. I still want to do the things I like to do to recharge. So, There are people out there who do dedicate the rest of their free time, and I commend them because it's a lot of work. But just at least respecting that, understanding that, and knowing that it is usually out of their own volition, taking up any other additional free time they have, and they do it because of the goodness of their hearts. Like, just know that and come into the conversation knowing that, and I think everyone will be better off for it.
What were some memorable experiences? You talked about the elementary school when you had like girls looking up to you. What other cases do you kind of recall that were, this makes it worth it? Like I'm doing this because it's so worth it.
I would say when I wrote another book already called Coding for Kids Python, and again that was by accident. That was when some publisher reached out to me because they liked how I shared some coding lessons on Instagram. And anyway, when that was published, there was like an author meet and greet, and it was the same thing. Somebody came up to me, saw that I was doing signings for that book, and they're like, wait, you wrote that book? And they're like, Why would coding be interesting? I thought that's for boys or whatever. Like, uh, why are you doing this?" And so I had this very interesting conversation with this, I think she was probably 11 or 12-year-old girl, and I feel like through that conversation she was inspired to kind of at least try it out. That was another very memorable moment for me. It's not just to show the representation, but to actually get them on board to say, let me just try it. And the most important part about that conversation, after she kind of alluded that she was going to try it, was if you don't like it, it's okay. Like, software engineering, coding, like, I know a lot, especially a lot of parents are like, oh, you should get into that. That's the thing now. Um, if you don't like it, after trying it yourself, it's okay. Like, to me, I just try to say, try it for the sake of trying it. Similar to how I said, if you have the opportunity to try in college different types of work and then find how what it is you actually like, it's the same thing with anyone learning something new. Try it, and if you don't like it, it's okay.
There is so much pressure that probably exists today. Is like you have to be a coder, right? Like it's the only path to success. And the reality is like oftentimes, like even folks that are probably studying computer science today, you're probably preparing for a job that might not even exist yet. Right? Like there's just the slate is open and you're absolutely right. Like the field is broad that you can do just so many things. Might not even be technology related for what it's worth.
I agree. I think that was a common question that I also got is, I want to be in the tech industry, but I don't enjoy coding. Like, that's okay. What do you enjoy? And so you run the gamut from like we have very creative people who like to solve problems in a creative way. So I said, have you tried, user interface design or human interaction design or UX roles? Or even marketing roles that are tech adjacent. So, if you like to be creative, if you're very good with copy and writing very succinct material for a tech product, you can intersect those two skill sets. You are knowledgeable in something technical or a technical product or a tech company, but then you use the skills you actually like to facilitate that product. So, you don't have to code the actual thing, you don't have to build the actual thing, you can market it or you can show people how to use it, or there's a whole other gamut of stuff. But I try to ask what it is or ascertain what they do enjoy and see if there's some sort of connection that's not necessarily coding related. And then if that doesn't work, there is the whole thing about, it doesn't have to be code in the general sense. When I was learning it, yes, you had to learn a coding language. Now, yes, we have AI tools, Chat GPT, Copilot. You have things that write the code for you. So now you just have to be very good with communication, explicit in what you're asking for, know what you need to do. Or you have low code tools where if you're good with diagrams or workflows, then you can code. You can do the same thing. You can solve the same problems. You just approach it from a different way. So I think that encourages a lot of people to say, maybe I'm not so good or don't enjoy like manual hand typing code, writing code, but there are other ways to do the same thing without doing that specifically.
I think there's two important gold nuggets here that we just kind of got. One is I think some of the more kind of interesting folks in the industry are always the ones that combine several skills, right? It's not just a pure engineer. Like you yourself are an engineer, an advocate, an author. Like you know how to communicate publicly with people, which means you very easily can communicate the value of a product and you can explain to people how to use this to kind of get them on board. Somebody that just codes, like, yeah, they might be very good at it, but like the combination of having this and the ability to explain your product well and to show people how to use it is extremely valuable. And like putting thoughts on paper and being very concise, and the people reading that say, yeah, I get it, also a very unique skill. So that combination I think is super super valuable. And also what kind of you mentioned is that there is definitely a gamut of roles that do not involve coding at all. That is because folks often forget that it's also technology is a means to an end. We're not doing this for the technology's sake. Like I code something because I want to solve a problem, not because I just want to write this code and get it out in the wild.
Pretty much. I touch a little bit on that on my book, where it's like, there are the coders, which I use in slightly a negative sense because you duke it out, you write something, and then you just forget about it. You don't see the bigger picture. You don't understand, how does this fit into the rest of the code base, or did I write it in a way that the rest of my team, if you are working on a team, can actually understand it? Are you just the only one that understands it? Are you so clever in your code that, like, you can use this to say, look at how awesome I am. I know all of these intricate features or clever ways to write things that you don't. So I like to separate, we want to avoid being that type of coder to what I would consider a professional software developer. You think about the bigger picture. You're not writing code for yourself, you're writing code for others to maintain it. You're writing it to add value. You're writing it to bring value to the business. And so, to achieve all of those goals and do it in a professional way, there's a lot more things you got to put into play. You got to know how to communicate well. You need to do the due diligence again of writing unit tests, doing documentation. You don't just write code and call it a day. There's so much more that's part of the job. And that's something I wish more people knew and want them to kind of, if they want to level up, if they want to just not be a coder, those are the things you got to consider.
So you yourself as a technical leader, how did you strike this balance between technical expertise, like being good at understanding kind of the technical pieces, and also being good at communicating to different audiences? Like what helped you grow that?
That came about because I was at a conference and I was learning about Angular. It was my first technical conference, and the person that was giving the talk was terrible. it was um it was not engaging. It was one of those people who just reread what was on the slide, bullet points, no visual cues to explain something. In essence, I didn't learn what I intended to learn from that talk. And so that was what inspired me to say, how do you get on these stages anyway? I could have done a much better job than this person talking about something that I know. And so that's what kickstarted the whole conference speaking thing. And so that was one part. Another that stuck with me as I've started to create this type of content and specifically conference talks. A big part is really understanding who the audience is. So when I wrote my book for kids, I would argue that's still one of the hardest things I've ever done in my career, in my life. Well, yeah, I would argue that's one of them. It's like, it's hard enough to talk about something technical, but then to write it for an audience, my audience was kids 10 and up. So you need to have it engaging. You need to write in a level that 10-year-olds and up would follow. You need to have visual cues in there. And then, writing those chapters out, explaining a for loop, explaining if else statements in Python. I had to go rewrite those maybe 10, 15 times, because when you have that much expertise or experience in something, you tend to neglect a lot of foundations. You're like, well, whoever I'm talking to will understand this. You assume that they have that basis to work off of. Here, you're working off of, you would have to assume nothing. And so having that mindset and writing in that way, I've kind of carried that into everything that I do. Unless I know my audience is like, okay, this talk is a 300 level, it's a deep dive, we want to get into the nitty gritty, then you adjust because you have that expectation. You know that the people have some level of knowledge and you can go a little bit deeper and you can skip a couple things. But even then, I still try to talk from a mindset or communicate and teach from a mindset that they don't have that knowledge. I assume they don't have that knowledge. And so when you come from that mindset, you do a lot of things to add context and help someone learn what it is. I did another talk called Documentation, the Missing Pieces, but really that kind of applies to a lot of things. When you're teaching anything, like a common example are acronyms or abbreviations. We use them all the time in tech. But if it's someone who's new, if it's someone who's crossing domains, that might not be the abbreviation you think you're saying. So even just common sense of like saying it out, spelling it out, either spelling it out on a slide or saying it out loud, that helps with the context. That helps the learner know what you're talking about and you get your intent across. And it's the same with visual cues. If you have something where even you yourself are kind of getting lost in the explanation, if you have a way to diagram it out or talk about it or have a funny example or analogy, love working in analogies. And so if there's any way I can fit that in, you not only engage the learner, but you have a bigger likelihood that they will remember what you are teaching because you give them a visual cue and you give them either a funny or a cute cue versus something that can be very dry and very technical and very boring. So, keeping those in mind, trying to keep it funny, trying to have a visual analogy, and trying to assume that the learner I'm talking to has no basis or no foundational knowledge helps me communicate much better and fill in those gaps for them.
If it makes folks feel better, I've been in the industry for close to a decade and I still run into acronyms that I have no idea what they are.
Yes.
I found that acronyms are generally one of the most non-inclusive pieces of our like kind of the vernacular that we use so much of it that we just assume that everyone knows. And then you find out that the same acronym, even within the same company, can mean like three different things depending on who you ask.
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah. I've been in on meetings where it was just acronyms galore. I'm like, I'm like asking my manager, I'm like, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does this mean? And it's like, oh, okay, now I get it. But it's as if it was in a completely different language. And it is. It really is a different language. So you need that context. And sometimes the more explicit you can be, the better it is for everyone.
So for somebody that wants to kind of have the technical chops and also the communication chops, what would you just say is the most important kind of mind shift that they need to make from purely technical thinking, other than what you just described as kind of being able to be a little bit more empathetic and look through the lens of people that do not have that context?
Really, it's not the most fun answer, but it is practice. So, as an example, if you want to do a blog post and you kind of know this is going to be my intended audience, this is the topic I want to talk about, go through it and just again it's due diligence. Have somebody else read it who you think would be your intended audience and be receptive to that feedback, or go to someone who doesn't have your same background, like give it to someone that works in the culinary industry, or go to someone who's a teacher, or go to someone that's not in the tech industry and have them read, watch, listen to whatever it is that you're creating and accept that feedback because they will likely point out all of the gaps that you might be missing. Acronyms, this doesn't flow well. I don't know what you're talking about when you mean this, even though it might be common knowledge in the tech industry. Take those pieces of feedback and continue to incorporate and iterate on what it is that you're creating. And then over time, you kind of learn in yourself as you write scripts, as you record videos, as you write blog posts, when you start to have your own eye refine what you are working on. Because in the past, you've said, oh, I remember this person didn't understand an acronym. You spell it out the next time you write your next blog post. Or someone says, the way you flowed here would have been better with a visual diagram. That's now in your tool set. You're like, oh, I'm talking about a workflow here. I should probably add a diagram here to help convey what I am saying. So really, it is just a lot of practice, but also trying to get that content out to people who are not in the tech industry. That's very important because if you have someone who may have the same background as you, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I get it. Oh, I know what you mean by API. Oh, I know what you mean by this, this, and this. You don't get those very meaningful pieces of feedback that will help make you a better technical communicator.
Good luck explaining to a 10-year-old what an API is. I'm sure that's an easy conversation.
I actually I used that in one of my talks. I said an API is kind of like how we order eggs in the US. So there's these labels we attach, right? You can order eggs like over hard, over easy, scrambled, poached, blah, blah, blah. And I'm constraining this to the US because I'm not more knowledgeable around the world if it's the same way. But in any US restaurant, breakfast restaurant, you can say, I want my eggs over hard. No matter who the cook is, I don't care how they make it. They can do whatever they want. As long as I get an egg that's like pretty much fully cooked on both sides and the yolk is fully cooked, that's what I'm expecting. And so, this language of ordering eggs, I equate to an API. When you ask an application to do something, you don't care how it does it, like a weather API. When you're asking for weather for Las Vegas, which is really, really hot right now, you don't care how it does it. They may go to this data source, they may have a microservice in the background, whatever. You don't care. That's not known to you. They just know, hey, this person gave me a latitude, longitude. They want a temperature in return. This is what we're going to give them. And so that language of ordering eggs, I equate to how APIs work. It's a common language for applications and people to talk to each other.
This reminds me that we should probably incorporate more food analogies in our technical
Always,
discussions.
always, always. I love it. It's great. It's a very great common denominator.
Adrian, I know we had a great conversation. It feels like I have more questions that are probably need to record another episode, given the breadth of everything we need to talk about. But I want to ask you one question to wrap today's episode, and that is, if you think of one piece of unconventional advice that you would want to share with our listeners who are either breaking into the tech space or thinking about breaking into the tech space, what would that be?
Being able to find a balance early on is the thing you should focus on. We are bombarded by whatever your next hobby is, hustle, monetize it, make money on it. And that kind of happened with Instagram for me, where it first became I'm sharing my journey to, oh my gosh, I have to post because, this and that and obligations. When something becomes a job that then you don't enjoy it anymore, it takes the fun out of everything. So I would say keep those parts sacred. Don't let everything be monetized. Have some stuff that you just do for you that you don't share. You find solace in it, and that's one way to actually maintain that balance as you continue to stay in the industry.
Fantastic advice. So, Adrian, where can folks find more about the work you're doing online? What should they check out? Any books, any recommendations, anything they should be watching out for?
Absolutely. I'm currently writing a book called Looks Good to Me Constructive Code Reviews. It's currently in early access, so you can grab it right now on manning.com. Just Google or search for Looks Good to Me. And you can find that book there. I'm updating it as much as I can monthly with new chapters, and I'm hoping to finish the book by the end of the year, early next year. I'm also currently working on a LinkedIn learning course that talks about Azure durable functions. So these are kind of like a super powered Lambda function or a single piece of code that you run on the cloud. So if you want to learn about that, head to LinkedIn Learning and search for that. That should be coming out in September of 2023. And then for everything else, I'm pretty good with Twitter for now. So just find me in my Twitter handle at Adrienne Tacke. I share a lot of my updates there.
Fantastic. And we'll include all the links in the show notes so folks don't need to even Google. It's all easy right in the description of this podcast. Adrian, thank you again for coming here and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, this is very, very fun. Thank you again for having me, Jen.